Hello there guys, it's me Chase. I'm going to attempt to do another video here on the 4 elements or pillars of good storytelling. I made one the other day and then I was doing it through edits on this kind of, I guess, this old software, video editing software, and it didn't work very well and I've pretty much lost it. So I'm redoing it again. So hopefully, the good news though is I pretty much know what I'm going to say at this point because I've done this video like 3 times already. So it shouldn't be too long and too convoluted. So let's get started. We're just get right into it. So, but really quickly, I just want to say one of the reasons why I'm doing this is because I come across on YouTube when I took my writing seriously. I would look up like how to do writing and stuff like that on YouTube and stuff. And what should you do? What are the tips and stuff? And there are endless tips that you can find and tools and whatever on what you got to do to make a good book and everything like that. And those can be definitely helpful. I get that. But the problem is there's so many of them, and some of them contradict each other, and some of them say things differently than the other ones where they can get you confused. And a lot of these people talk as though these are like doctrinal, dogmatic things you have to have in order to make a good story. And it can just kind of leave, especially new writers, sort of just with a heavy burden and confused and not sure. And when they're writing their story, they don't even know. Like they're just like, oh, this is gonna crash and burn, and all that stuff. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to sort of, I just as I accumulate this knowledge, and I try to apply it to my writing, and I ask myself, is what this person's saying I should do? Is that what I'm doing right now? Stuff like that. It's just so much thinking, and I like to compare it to like if you're starting to juggle, you juggle like 2, I don't know, bowling pins, as they usually do, 2 bowling pins or 2 tennis balls, something like that. That's not too hard. It's pretty easy. And then you add a third one, and I can juggle 3. Add 4 though, it starts to get complicated. And then 5. What about 6, 7, 8? And then, man, it's really getting hard to just juggle all these things together. And if you lose one, everything comes tumbling down. And so sometimes I feel like that's kind of what new writers struggle with when it comes to writing stories. It's just you look up all this stuff on the internet and what you should do to write a good story, how your first page should be, how your first chapter should be, how you should introduce your character, what your character should look like and be like, and blah 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 blah, your plot, and should you have 2, 3 acts in your story, should you have 4 or 5, and so many things, and a rising tension, which I do think is a good thing to have throughout the story as it goes. All these, when should you put action scenes in there? When should you put this, comic relief or blah 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 blah? And just there's so much that I think will convolute and just confuse, especially new authors. So what I think would be good for new authors is, instead of giving those like just juggling all this stuff and just not having a good time. I mean, I want people to have a good time when they're writing, and so I think that will get past a lot of writer's block issues. I think we get discouraged also with how we should write. The way you should write a story, and all this stuff. Just so many things. Like I said, so many things that just overburden new writers. I think it comes from experienced writers who, of course, are experienced, but they have. It's like when we're like theology, when we talk about theology, somebody who's been in the faith for quite a while, and they got the Trinity down, they got all all kinds of doctrines down and stuff like that, and trying to explain all that to a new believer. I mean, I've discipled, I do, I guess, on and off. I don't see some of these people every single day, but there's this young girl who's part of one of our mission trips, and I try to help her understand some good Christian doctrine and stuff. But at the same time, I'm trying not to overwhelm her, because I know that I can do that really easily. I can just start talking about some of the much more deeper, more complex things like eschatology, and again, like the Trinity. These are really important, like the Trinity and stuff like that. But I don't want to overwhelm her. And I know I can easily do that because of what I know. And so you have to really, if you're trying to help people who are new to something, you got to really get on their level. You got to recognize they're new to this, and I can't treat them like an experienced author. It's not to look down upon them. You're not looking down upon them. You're trying to help them out. You're trying to help them get to that point where they can start adding more complexities and sophisticated elements to their storytelling as they grow as storytellers. So that's basically what I want to do. So what I want to do here is, instead of giving you this big old long list of things you got to do to make a good story that just leaves you overwhelmed and you're overthinking things and everything like that. Most of the stuff you don't even think about. You don't really know how to think about it. It's new to you. Instead of doing that, what I want to just do is try to make it really simple and provide what I think at least are the very simple elements. That if you start with these simple elements, I think it does two things. One, it removes that burden, so that you can think more clearly, and you're not thinking of this thing over here and that thing over there, and I got to do that thing over there. I got to do that thing over there. It's the bedrock, where you just basically build your home. If you want to have a room right over there, you can have a room right over there, or whatever. Where do you want to put your room and this room and the kitchen and things like that. Just the basic bedrock foundations. Another way to look at it is, I heard it said once by somebody. I think I was looking up some tips on how painting. I'm trying to get into landscape painting. I'm not very good at it at all, but I'm trying to get into it. Where somebody said, when you look at a painting or you look at any kind of art piece, what you're looking at are just basic shapes. Behind the very well detailed artwork that you see are just basic shapes. They start with the basic shapes, and then they just add, and then it creates the vivid images that we see, these beautiful paintings and whatnot. So it's a lot like that. It's starting with some of the basic shapes, the basic foundations, the basic stuff. It's your ABCs kind of stuff. And so that's what I want to do here, with what I call, again, the 4 elements of good storytelling. And now, who am I? Who's Chase? He's a nobody. Yes, I'm a nobody. I'm not really successful in terms of selling books. Obviously, I'm, again, who knows who I am. But if you're, and why should you listen to me? That's a good question. Probably shouldn't, because I don't have the success and the credibility behind my name to, But these are just things that I have seen that are parts of good storytelling that and help authors write good stories. So that's kind of what I just think that this could be helpful, and I apply it to my writing as well. So with that being said, the first one that we want to consider, and this is the first one for a reason, but it's very simply inspiration. You have to be inspired. You have to have something that inspires you. If you're not inspired to write, you're running on fumes. There's nothing. Again, going back to the painting thing, one of the struggles that I have when it comes to painting, I still would love to paint some beautiful landscape stuff, but I struggle with having an inspired image in my mind. My drawing and stuff like that I've drifted away from it a lot in the last several years, and even just drawing what I usually draw, which is like human figures. Sometimes I struggle with that, like being inspired by that. But I remember always, whenever I'd have all of a sudden an image would come in my mind of drawing something, it's there in the mind, and it's like screaming to you, make me real, put me down on something, and I gotta draw it. And so I would draw it. It's in my mind, it's in my head, and it's the same thing with painters. One of the important keys of painting something beautiful is you almost have to have the image in your mind already, what you want, and then you're putting it on the paper. Music as well. When I make music, I get a tune in my head, and then I'm like, oh, I got to do that. And then, now I'm inspired to make this little piece of music, and it gives me that direction and that motivation to do it. Same thing with writing. You have to have something important that you want to tell, like a story or a message that you want to get across. I mean, good storytelling always inspires people, but again, good storytellers are inspired by something, and just good writers in general. They're inspired by something. It doesn't have to be a novel, but still, like I've been inspired by Francis Schaeffer's How Should We Then Live. I mean, that book blew my mind, and it made me go, I've got to write about this, what he's talking about in this book. I mean, it's so important for the world to know this, and for Christians to know this. And so I was like, it caused me to rework so much of my story to orient it towards that message that Francis Schaeffer was talking about. But not just Francis Schaeffer. When I read the Bible, I'm inspired by the biblical stories. I'm inspired by the gospel. These things make me want to write my stories. I'm also inspired by bad news in the news. The things that I hear and I see in the news that make me go, get me all flustered and everything like that. It makes me want to write and to do what I can in the gifts that God has given me, combat the culture of death, as it were. For anybody who's watching this video for the first time, you don't know who I am. It's pretty clear where I stand. Sorry, I've contemplated whether or not I'm going to get into my particular, sometimes controversial beliefs over stuff like this, and it seems unavoidable. I'm just gonna end up doing it, so something you gotta deal with. But or just stop listening to me. But anyways, so having that inspiration, something that inspires you, that makes you want to write this story, that is number one. That is key, and that's why it is number one. So without the inspiration, you're really not going to go anywhere. You're not going to be driven. You're going to constantly be running into roadblocks, writer's block, stuff like that. It's always going to happen. So that's number one. Now, number two is a general outline. Yeah, a general outline. Now, I say general outline. The reason why I say general outline is because I don't think you need to have a super specific outline, especially if you are in the right. I just had some almonds a little while ago, so sorry, but especially if in the writing world, there's kind of this spectrum, and on one end is the pantser, the other end is the plotter. I think it's called the plotter, and you can kind of wonder where you are on this line. I think it's a good idea. The pantser is the guy who just sort of goes by the seat of his pants, or just writes by the seat of his pants. Now, pantsers typically can write without inspiration. They just have that gift. It just sort of automatically does its thing. And then plotters, they can have that sort of issue to it as well, that lack of inspiration, and still go. I'm not saying that you should not have inspiration. That would contradict my whole rule number one. But I think most authors, I think it's a good idea to be somewhere kind of in the middle. Not be a full-on pantser, not to be a full-on plotter. The plotter who does every little detail, outlines every little detail of the story before he writes it. It's like he writes the story before he writes it, kind of like that. I don't think you need to do that. Have a general outline, especially if you have elements of being a pantser. You're going to inevitably go off script. It's just going to happen. So, but you don't want to be so off script that you're making a mess. You're going way off into left field, and you're anywhere near where you wanted to be. That's not good. You don't want to do that unless you end up stumbling into a really cool story. I guess that'd be kind of cool. But anyways, I think it's a good idea to be somewhere in between, where you have a little bit of the pantser in you, but you also know how to keep yourself from going way out into la la land. And so yeah, so what I do is I like to make a general outline of basically where I want to go, and what I want to do. But I do sometimes tend to go off script from the outline. Now, when I go off script from the outline, I'm not saying I go way out into left field, but I do a little bit to kind of change things and alter some things. So if I just give you like a quick example right here in the outline for The Black Priest, which I'm probably going to change the name of that, just because of the way the story is developing. Again, things that change, but there's this area where, let me just read what I wrote here. It says, the plan set, Crosser and No go downstairs to have a few drinks and talk to some of the patrons, learning of rumors and activities southeast on the other side of the river, as well as stories of lights coming from the swamps. Danny remains upstairs with Stratos and twins to talk, where they share stories of strange past encounters they each had. Stratos talks about some of the stories of unknown people Broden kept him from whenever he had an incident with magic, while Coven and Tannis shared strange stories they heard. Danny reluctantly adds to the conversation her own encounters under the apprenticeship of Arkadesh, sharing more scar stories and finally talking of a particular experience that haunts her, one in which she was attacked in the wilderness somewhere as a little girl, Why, she never knew, but she claims to have been saved by someone or something whose presence she felt closely but could never understand. So that's kind of a part of this, it's a scene in the book, the upcoming book I'm still working on. Now, I've written that scene, essentially, but I've changed it a little bit. Yes, Danny and Crosser and Noah go downstairs and they talk to some of the people down there to get information about their current objective, sort of mingling a little bit. But and yes, Danny with Stratos and the twins, they talk about strange stories that they had of things that scared them or disturbed them in their past. Now, I ended up not having COVID and Tannis share a story at all. Partly because I couldn't really think of one for them. But the story that Stratos shared was different than the one in the outline I just read for you. And Danny's story is basically the same, but a little bit different. She doesn't really talk about any of her experiences with Urkadesh, her master in the story, her mentor, as it were. But she does, with the story, she talks about being attacked in the wilderness as a little girl by a pack of wolves, and then being saved by some strange entity that she couldn't tell if it was personal or human or not. She tells that story and how it was strange and weird and odd. Yeah, that's in there, but the way it's described here, not exactly. Again, see, that's kind of where I went off script a little bit. I kind of took a little bit of liberty. That's kind of having a general outline, so having a general outline which doesn't restrict you from when you get to a certain point, go, oh, that'd be a good idea to do that, so let a little bit of the pantser and you fly. So that's kind of cool. Do something with that. Have that general outline. Now, that's the second one. The third one is interesting characters. Now, I'm going to make a separate video on this one with the interesting characters, because I think this deserves a video in and of itself. I think interesting characters is one of the most important elements of a good story. I mean, without interesting characters, again, you can have the inspiration. That's really important. But again, that doesn't mean, just because you have inspiration doesn't mean you're not going to screw up. You still got to have the interesting characters. Without the interesting characters, it will crumble. Yeah, you got to have the interesting characters. And again, I'm going to make a video on what that means. But just to quickly here explain what I mean by interesting characters. Again, a very simple example. Having a character who is really brave, sort of a go-getter kind of guy who's heroic, all that stuff. A very basic character, or how about a character like, especially nowadays, a character who's like a drunk and just a deadbeat dad or something like that. A character like that, pretty basic stuff. Nothing really memorable about him. He has an almost irredeemable nature to him. Everybody goes, oh, we've seen this before. That's very one-dimensional, not very interesting character. It doesn't not work. I mean, it can work for a story that's forgettable. But if you want a character, I think you would want a character or characters who are interesting, who are complicated, who are more than one-dimensional. So how about a character, like going back to that particular character who's a drunk, who's almost irredeemable, kind of has irredeemable characteristics of him, deadbeat dad or something like that, where he suddenly shows elements of heroism. Or again, you take a character with who's super brave, but then you provide a caveat to it, who's very brave in the face of danger, except for one particular example. Now, what that is, it's up to you. So all of a sudden they're brave, but all of a sudden they're not. For some reason, something causes them to like turn tail and run or something like that. Now they're frightened, they're scared, and now that character almost instantly becomes more complex. It's like, okay, I thought I had this guy figured out. Apparently I don't. I think the show Arcane, League of Legends, on Netflix does a great job of this, of making you think these certain characters are this particular kind of character, and all of a sudden, boom, they add, as soon as they get you thinking that you've got this character figured out. They add another layer to the character that goes, okay, this guy's a little bit different, or this lady's a little bit different. Okay, that's interesting. So stuff like that. But there's more to it. Like I said, I'm going to get to that more in the other video that I'm gonna make with about characters. But the fourth one, number 4, is key plot points. So the way I like to describe this one is when I go hiking, or like if I'm gonna go hike up a mountain, which is obviously not here in Texas, but when I'm out of state and I'm hiking somewhere in the mountains, I like to look at the point that I want to get to. I mean, we have some good, cool places to hike here in Texas too. So we got like Enchanted Rock and stuff like that. You know, it's cool. So, but I look at the point that I want to get to, and I say, and you know, that's where I want to go. Now, everything after that becomes how I get there. What paths should I take? What should I bring with me? What are the things that I'm going to need to get to that point? That's the point I want to get to. Now, apply that same principle to storytelling. Have in your mind as you're writing, or before you're writing, even during your writing, a particular point in the story that you haven't written down yet, but it's like in your mind, like that needs to be in the story. And you want to do it obviously for reasons that are relevant to the story, that are actually going to mean something to the story or the character, you know. But like a particular point, an event that's going to happen. Let me give you a quick example. In my book that I'm editing right now, The Arlington Gambit, before I got to this point, there's a point in the story where Stratos is sort of reconciling with Danny after they've been sort of nemesis in the story. There's a point in the story where they kind of actually start to understand each other. Where Danny's been recently injured she got slashed in her shoulder, and so she had to get it all patched up, and so they went to she had to trust Stratos, because again they have trust problems in the story and stuff like that, but she has to trust Stratos. He's going to take her to a friend of his who patches her up, and they have a moment as the night settles in where they actually were able to be honest with each other and have a moment of just, we're not fighting, you know, we're not constantly, why'd you do this, why'd you do this, why'd you ruin my life, and kind of, they're not doing any of that stuff. They're just having a genuine conversation with one another. They're talking about scars that they both have, because they both have a lot of scars. Of course, Danny's gonna have another one right there, but they both have a lot of scars, and so they realize they got a lot in common. And that's going to increase as in this book that I'm currently writing, The Black Priest. You're going to see their relationship grow a little bit more and more, and you really see that they have a lot in common, more than they even hoped, they even wanted to be. But anyways, that moment in the Arlington Gambit where they're talking and they're having that conversation with each other, that's like an important moment for me, for both those characters. I had that planned out before I even got to that. Like that moment's going to happen, and so I'm developing the story to get them both to that point. How do I get them both here to this point right here? That's what I'm talking about. You want to, and when you do stuff like that, it opens up a lot of opportunity. It really will. It's kind of like knowing your ending before you begin. Now I don't know how I'm going to end the story, but I do know in terms of like the particular books how I wanted them to end. But knowing how it's going to end helps you get to that end. Where do you want your characters by the time you get to this point? What state do you want them to be in? What do you want to happen to them before they get to that point? What do you want to happen to them after that kind of, that stuff like that? So that opens up all the opportunities to then create the story. So here's the beginning, here's the end. Now you're just filling in the gaps of how that came to be. And I think that will immediately remove so much of the writer's block problem. Because if your intention is your character comes to a point where he or she reconciles with somebody over some issue that they both had throughout the story, now you're just going, what's that problem, and how did it start, and okay, well then now you're working on doing that, how this rift happened between them, and then now you're just, each character, everything that happens to the characters coming up to that point is all about getting to that point of reconciliation. Boom, now it just, ideas will start coming all over the place. If my goal is to get, like for Anastasia in the story, she's really uptight, she's, doesn't take herself a little too seriously kind of stuff. She's super disciplined, she's very religious and all that stuff, but again, makes her kind of boring, makes her kind of really uptight and all that stuff like that. How do I get Anastasia to overcome that imbalance in her life, that she needs to sometimes relax a little bit and just be human, be a person. There's nothing wrong with being just chilling out for a little bit and enjoying some time to relax and enjoy the rewards of your work. And she never wants to do that. Well, how do I get on Asaria to understand that? I put a character in her life that is like the exact opposite of that, who's going to make her have to recognize this stuff, this imbalance in her life. And so that's why Odin's there. Well, that's one of the reasons why Odin's there, but he's not the only reason. But that's that. See, when I'm thinking about things like that, now I'm able to think about the kinds of people that need to be in this person's life. And again, once again, the analogy of hiking up that mountain. That's where I want to get. Now, what do I need to get me there? What kinds of things are going to need to happen? Where do I need to go? What points do I need to go to? You know, that's what you want. That's what I'm talking about when I talk about key plot points. Think about key plot points in the story. So anyways, guys, that's everything right there. Try to do it as quick as I could. Again, 25 minutes. Yeah, it'll work. But I hope this is helpful. I hope I didn't speak too fast, because I'm not going to edit this video. Sorry, I tried to do it and it didn't work out. So anyways, guys, I gotta go. Solo Deo Gloria. God bless. Bye.